Drage gledateljice i gledatelji, dobrodošli u ATMA podcast. Velika čast mi je najaviti mog današnjeg gosta. On je dr. Kenneth Valpey, doktor profesor vajšnavske teologije s Oxforda, znanstveni istraživač vedskih tekstova i prevoditelj sa sanskrita, autor preko 20 knjiga i predavač. Ono što ga čini posebnim je činjenica da dr. Valpey nije samo akademik i ekspert za vede, već i praktičar vedske škole Bhakti joge još od 1972. godine. 2014. je prihvatio zavjet sanjasa, što znači odvojenik, sa zaređenim imenom Krishna Kshetra Swami, te osim u akademskom, također i u svojstvu duhovnog učitelja, putuje diljem svijeta podučavajući i vodeći mnoge tragatelje na putu Bhakti joge ili duhovnog procesa predanog služenja Bogu. Pa krenimo! Dr. Valpey, welcome to ATMA podcast. Welcome to Split. It is my great honor to talk to you today.
Thank you very much. It's my good privilege to be with you and to be in Split.
Yes, do you like Split?
I have split to split, as we say in America.
So,
Yes.
You dedicated most of your life into the research of ancient Vedic scriptures, literature, Sanskrit. So we all know that there are many theories about the very origin of Vedas and the very age of Vedas. So what's your personal view on this, the age and the origin, but also for which purposes were they composed?
These are many big questions.
Yeah.
And what keeps scholars in business is disagreeing with each other about these things. And of course, they're happy to promote their theories. And I have to say that I personally am not so much involved in that particular area of scholarship where I'm trying to determine the age of Vedic literature. Perhaps I should say first that Veda is a very broad term which can be more narrowly taken or more broadly. There's what are called the Vedic Samhitas, most famously the Rig Veda Samhita, which is more than 1,000 hymns in a language which some will call Sanskrit, but technically could just be called Vedic. Mm-hmm. And the common scholarly consensus for the age of Rig Veda usually goes from 1200 BC to 1500 BC. That's from scholarly perspectives of persons who generally are ready to admit that we're just guessing. And it's because these texts were not concerned about this sense of time that we have today. In fact, we could say that's one of the distinctive features of Veda in the narrower and the broader sense, that the interest was in timelessness. It was about going beyond time. So if we think about purpose of Veda, I find it really, in the broadest and deepest sense, it's about how can we as human beings go beyond time to realize our own reality, our own existence, which is beyond time, which is confined to time as we experience it normally, but which can be experienced in a different way.
Mm-hmm. But when we speak also about the origins, who wrote them?
Okay, if you speak to the traditional Vedic Brahmins, they will say, that's the wrong question to ask, with all due respect. They will say, They were not written by any persons. They are called apurusheya. That's the Sanskrit term, which means, Purusha means a person, and when you add the prefix a before it, it negates. So they say they were they weren't exactly composed, they were seen. They were envisioned by sages, and these sages are named in each of the hymns of the Rig Veda, especially. There will be a different sage who is identified, but it's understood by the tradition that it's not that they composed, but rather they saw, and then they evoked what was already there.
It's kind of revelation, like
Exactly.
from the God.
Yeah, it's a revelation, and so they will say there is no beginning to Veda. It's always there, even after this whole cosmos, the whole universe, even after its total destruction, however many eons from now, Veda will still be there. There will be another creation, and then Vedas will be recalled as they were before. So that indicates also the sense of timelessness that the Veda is concerned with. And so, yeah, this question of who wrote them, well, okay, now take the more modern perspective, and it will simply be said, okay, those who are identified in each hymn would be the ones who have composed the particular hymns. There's also the tradition of organizing the Veda, that a certain figure, a certain personage, or personality, we sometimes say, Vyasa, organized. He is said to have divided, and therefore that name is given, that he is Vyasa, he is separating out. And then he was giving portions of Veda to different students that he had, and then they were learning those portions, giving that on to their students, and in this way it's been carried down over time. An interesting thing about these very early texts, I speak again of the Rig Veda, is the tradition of the recitation of these texts has been maintained over the millennia by a particular process of learning, of hearing and repetition, where there's guarantees that every single syllable will be there and will be pronounced in the right way and will not be lost. And that's been carried over millennia, and there are schools in India, especially South India, where they start with kids that are 5 years old.
Good memory.
And these kids, they just hear and repeat, and repeat. And until it's part of their body, they embody the Veda, essentially.
Yeah, I watched it on YouTube. I also saw it on India. It's amazing and has such a mystical feeling to it when you hear it.
There's a lot of power there.
Yeah, we are drawn to it. Wow, it's amazing. So would you say that maybe Vedas and Sanskrit are the oldest knowledge and the oldest language on the earth?
Maybe.
Maybe? What do you think?
I'm hesitant to say because I haven't lived back at the time of, say, the Rig Veda.
Maybe
so
in another body.
Yes, and of course, the traditional Vedic scholars of India today, they will be very assertive to say, yes, this is the oldest. So maybe it is. In any case, it's very old. The question, I think, has to come up, is older, therefore, more authoritative or better in some way?
Yes, that's a better question.
I think we have to ask that. And it could be the case that it is. It could be that texts from earlier times have a wisdom which we have lost as time has passed on, as technology has engulfed us, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to say, yes, the Vedas are the oldest. Now, from another perspective, I personally like to say that Veda, in the most broad and comprehensive sense, where you take the word Veda, which in Sanskrit comes from vid, which means to know, it's about all human knowledge or all human wisdom, from what in later times maybe branched out into different traditions, including traditions of the West, including our religious, spiritual traditions of the West, in which there is deep wisdom. So I like to think, yes, that's also Veda, in the broader sense of what is Veda, rather than thinking in sectarian ways, which I don't think is always so helpful.
I agree, yeah. So often people are also confused about terms like Hinduism, Vedas, Dharma, which is what? What is actually Hinduism? I know it's kind of umbrella word, for many things. So can you put a little clarity on this?
The word Hindu is one that we don't find in the Vedas until much more recently, from like 16th century, we start seeing the word Hindu. And it seems to be an import from outside of what we now call India. There is a river between what we now call India and what is now Pakistan, or within Pakistan, the river Sindh, or Sindhu. And the story we understand is that those who are on the western side of that river referred to those on the eastern side as Hindu. They didn't speak out the S, that became Hindu. Mm-hmm. And so it was a geographical term, which not until the 19th century, with the British presence and their concern, their political concerns, which had a lot to do with meddling in the cultures and religions of India, it became Hinduism. There was no such thing as Hinduism. Mm-hmm. And now somehow that caught on. And now people in India are thinking, I am Hindu. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, many of them then identify that with the land, which has come to be called India. So it gets complicated.
Yeah.
What is it? What does it mean? What's its value? I had one professor who, when I was studying Hinduism, he said, Hinduism, really about anything that you say about it, the opposite is bound to be also true.
That's a good one.
There's so much
it's such a broad,
that goes under. Now, one thing that's generally said about Hinduism, to try to, put it all in one bag, but which is actually also not true, but is generally true, is that Hindus take the Veda, Rig Veda, Sama, Yajur, Atharva, the Upanishads, and other Vedic literature, as revelation and as authoritative. Generally, one can't say absolutely. And they may say, yes, Veda, we follow Veda. And then you ask a Hindu, an average Hindu, so can you tell me something it says in Veda? Well, not really. because it's not something that's part of their lives directly. But in general, we can make that connection. Yes, Veda, there is a sense that this is our revelatory scriptures, and from them we have the understanding of ultimate purpose of life and so on. You mentioned dharma, that's another difficult word. We can go on and on. If you look in a Sanskrit dictionary under dharma, you'll see many different ways that it's translated. One way to, the way I like to think of dharma most is just with the English word ethics. Dharma is ethics, because ethics it's about normativity. It's about what should I do, what ought I to do. It's about here's what is and here's what ought to be, and how do I get from what's here to from is to what ought to be. That bridge, you can say, is the idea of dharma. Mm-hmm. But in India, they have conferences. You'll find scholars coming together regularly discussing what is dharma, because it's kind of an open-ended term. One of the most famous works of the broadly speaking Vedic corpus is the Bhagavad Gita. And this Bhagavad Gita is sometimes considered a kind of core text to also understand what is dharma. But maybe we can elaborate on that a little later if you want.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, I wanted to ask you this question, because when we talk about the origin of Vedas, there always pops up this Aryan invasion theory. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit what is it, and has it been disputed? Is it still strongly accepted in academia? Because I hear that it's just another theory. Mm. Right? But they taught students in the books about it.
Ah, yes. The Aryan invasion theory was promoted from, I would say, the late 19th century, and then up through early 20th century, well, up into late 20th century. But I would say it's been generally replaced. It's no longer invasion, now it's more migration.
Migration,
Yeah.
Okay.
There's been a study, which I've found to be the best study on that topic, by a friend of mine, Edwin Bryant, who made this the topic of his doctoral thesis at Harvard University. He's especially expert at bringing together the arguments from many, many, many different sources, and then weighing the arguments. And what he basically concludes from the evidence, there's archaeological evidence, there's linguistic evidence, there's what else? There's a few other types of evidence. He says it's inconclusive. Mm. You really can't say definitely one way or another. One thing that is often thought to be what will kind of be a key to open up the question of the Aryan migration or whatever theory is the civilization, the word's slipping my mind right now, but the civilization that was the Indus Valley civilization, which has been seen to have mysteriously, seems to have disappeared about, as I remember, they say 1800 BCE, so before the Common Era, around 1800, it seems to have disappeared and went to 3000 BCE or earlier. And nobody's been able to decipher their script. They've left some small seals. These are like, which may have been used in sending postage sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And there's some interesting images on those seals, and there's some interesting marks which look like language, but nobody's been able to decipher. Now some of your followers are going to say, oh yes, we have deciphered. And they will point maybe to some other video on YouTube or whatever. I don't want to say absolutely it hasn't been deciphered, but the vast majority, the scholars I know, they say no, it hasn't actually been deciphered. And that means, well, we don't really know what they're saying. If we knew what they were saying, maybe they could tell us something about this theory, and maybe we could understand was the Vedic tradition a continuation from them or what? So that's all. And historically speaking, the Vedic literature is quite mysterious because it seems to just appear at some point. Suddenly you have these hymns which are highly sophisticated in many ways. And where did it come from? So the tradition says, well, they're eternal, they're revelation. And
have you seen those old manuscripts? How old? Which one is the oldest one, and where it's held?
Manuscripts you will not find going back earlier than approximately 1,000 or even 1,100 of the Common Era. That means 1,000 years ago, and before that you don't find. What you can find earlier is stone inscriptions, copper inscriptions, but these are generally found on monuments, and they're telling a little story about some king and how he conquered everything, and such information like that. But that's what I was saying before. The Veda has been carried over these millennia orally, just from teacher to student.
Yeah, by heart. They were learning by heart. Yeah,
learning. And then Friedrich Max Müller, who never went to India.
Really?
He was from Germany. He became professor in Oxford.
I didn't know that. The first time I hear that he never went to India. Oh.
Yeah. Somehow or other, he organized to have it, the Rig Veda, transcribed and translated, and then he published that. And the traditional Brahmins in India, some of them said, this is the beginning of the end of our tradition. And others said, no, this is great. Finally, our tradition is going to go to the world.
So do you think that Max Müller made a disservice or a service to the humanity? What do you say?
I think he was an interesting character, and I think he meant well. But his view of the Vedic tradition was, he considered it fascinating, but he considered it to be the record of the childhood of humanity. In other words, he thought we've advanced so much more from that time, and it's also valuable to look back at our childhood. But he saw it as childhood only. He didn't, we could say he missed the point.
Yeah, definitely. So when you were speaking about, persons, going on YouTube, watching different videos, they know it all. There's always something, and especially in these areas, there is a theory which is kind of popular where they say that Vedas actually come from Russia, from Serbia, from Bulgaria, like from Slavic regions, that those people brought Vedas to India. What do you say on this?
I don't know anything of...
Because of the similarity of
Right.
Sanskrit words, I guess.
Yeah, as a scholar, the first thing I'd have to say is I don't know, because I don't know how they're making those claims. On what basis? Maybe they have some arguments, but just to see similarities in words doesn't really prove anything. There's a lot of there's endless debate about how different cultures relate to each other. You know, there's what are called diffusion theories that, okay, something starts here and it gets diffused around the world. And it's all highly inconclusive. But what I would say is, why not agree that there would be sages in the Slavic countries in very ancient times, speaking and writing, and why not some of what they might have spoken and written have seeped into India, and then in India become developed and go back out. Something that scholars of ancient trade have been saying, I think, for several decades now, is there's been a lot more communication around the world through trade in very ancient times, Roman times, pre-Roman times, than has been thought in the past. And it can be going in so many different directions. So why not that there was something coming from Russia, from other Slavic countries into India, going out again. Again, the broader sense of Veda, I think, would accommodate that idea.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, I wanted to ask you, what do you think were like original Vedic, I don't know, teachings, manuscripts changed? Maybe things added on, things removed, like comments made which were kind of misleading. How much the Vedas today, we know today, are the same as the original ones? Because we know that
Yes.
people have this tendency, to
We
a little
always-
bit, change, add,
Tamper.
remove where we don't like,
Tampering.
Yeah, tampering.
Yes. Yeah, there's been, well,
I even heard, sorry to stop you, I even heard this theory coming from the famous Indologist from Croatia, that some chapters in Bhagavad Gita were added later on.
yes. So that's one of the things that keeps what are called Indologists
Busy.
in business. Keeps them having a chair in their university, and it's a very fascinating thing. And as I mentioned about Rig Veda, it seems that one can say it is what it was. At the same time, the scholars of Rig Veda will say that there's been a progression of addition over time, so that the hymns of the 10th mandala, there are 10 what are called mandalas or parts, are later than the hymns of the first, second, third, and so on mandalas. That's one thing. There's also a progression from these earlier Rig, Sama, Yajur, Atharva Veda texts to later texts which are still considered part of the classical Vedic corpus called, there's the Brahmanas, there's the Aranyakas, and there are the Upanishads. And in particular, the Upanishads are very much celebrated by the more philosophically interested, concerned in the present day. And it's always understood. They have come in some sense later, and modern scholarship puts them from, say, the 8th century of before the Common Era for the classic Upanishads up through, I don't know, 2nd century or earlier, 4th century of before the Common Era. Mm-hmm. And then there are many other Upanishads which are considered much later. But what I wanted to say is then you come to the epics, and the famous epics, there are 2 of them. One is the Ramayana, and one is the Mahabharata. And people love to watch the dramas that are performed about these because they're very dramatic.
Especially in India movies, everything is dramatic. Each glance is like piercing, thunder.
Yeah. And the Mahabharata in particular, already in the, I think we can say 12th or 13th century, one of the highly respected commentators on the Mahabharata and other Vedic texts was Madhva Acharya. And Madhva, so many centuries ago, he said, this text has been interpolated. It's been added to, it's been changed. This can't be how it has been. But the effort to find an ur-text of the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, generally scholars will agree that you will not find. There is no such thing as an ur-text. Because first of all, it began as an oral tradition. And the writing, in fact, writing was considered kind of low class. You don't write things unless you have to...
Unless you have dementia.
unless you have to go shopping or something. Yeah. Maybe write your shopping list. But
you should remember.
Yeah, you should remember important. This is important. You have to remember it. And if you don't remember it, you don't know it.
Yeah.
And if you remember it and know it, you can speak it, and somebody else can hear it, and then they know it. That was the understanding.
If you cannot remember it, it's not for you.
Yeah.
One.
Yeah, you don't have the adhikar, the qualification. So, but orality is super flexible. I can tell you a story, and then you can tell the same story to your friends, and you'll add something.
Yeah.
So then, after the generally understood to be after the epics, comes a genre of literature called the Puranas. And now we're getting into a genre which is all about dialogue, in which someone is telling a story, reciting to someone else, and that person is telling somebody else and someone else. And that's now getting written down, but the sense of needing to write down exactly what someone else said, that sense is not necessarily there. Why should I have to write exactly? I mean, it's not necessary. I'm going to write from my realization. Or I'm a scribe, and my teacher tells me to copy down what's already been written. I'm copying it, but some words, it's a little unclear. Okay, I'll work it out this way. And, or this part, it's really kind of boring. Let's skip that part.
Let's skip that part.
Yeah. I know a better story.
Yes.
So that can also happen. But there's also a sense within the tradition that still all of this is divinely inspired, that it is still revelation, and that it is to be taken at face value, in a sense. So one can look at it from both sides, in a sense. From the more skeptical side, you say, wait a minute, there's been tampering, there's been, as you mentioned, about the professor who has analyzed one of the texts, the Bhagavad Gita, in this way. One can look that way, and then one can come to we might want to say the more devotional side and say it is a kind of complete truth as it is, and we can accept it as it is, and we can take it as perfect wisdom. So I've mentioned there's the building up over time, over a progression of time, and there's the sort of the idea of tampering, and that can happen in different ways. And then what happens is scholars come along and they say, well, gosh, we have 100 different manuscripts of, let's say, the Mahabharata. So will the real Mahabharata please stand up? So they will sit down and create what is called a critical edition. They'll set out some criteria by which they will decide, no, this we can include, and this we're going to just put in the footnotes. And they're also analyzing, well, we've got 100 manuscripts. We can tell that these are related to each other, and we can tell these are related to each other. Seems like there are two branches. And this is a whole area of scholarship. People spend their whole lives just doing this. The Mahabharata there's a critical edition. It's about, I don't know, it's well over 20 volumes, thick volumes, which a whole group of scholars did in India over a period of 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah. It's recently been translated completely into English.
Wow.
And it's available from Penguin. It's quite easily available. It's a good translation. I know the translator. Anyway, so critical edition, that's a sort of recreation. Now, in the case of one text which is particularly interesting for one of the Hindu traditions, the so-called Vaishnava tradition, is the Bhagavata Purana. And what's particularly interesting about it in terms of this question of interpolation is how minimally there are variations. All the variations that are found are very, very, very minimal and insignificant. And the reason for that is that this particular text has received so much commentary from early times, from at least, say, the 14th or 15th century, but also earlier, so that it sort of has the commentary has a way of freezing the text. Okay, this is what the commentator has commented on, so we have to take what he has commented. We can't change that.
Yes.
So that's another phenomenon.
Thank you. Well, that's really fascinating.
I think I took you deeper than you wanted to go with that.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting to know. I know many of our viewers are interested in such topics. Okay. I think they will be delighted to hear such things. But I want to ask you, let's move more into like inter-religious talk. So what are the main similarities, but also the main differences between Vedic traditions and Abrahamic religions like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism? What would you say?
Okay, the Abrahamic traditions are often called the religions of the book. They are very much based on written texts which were put together and which came to be called in the Jewish and then the Christian traditions as first the Hebrew Bible and then the Christian Bible, which included what the Hebrew Bible was to the Jews became the Old Testament for the Christians, and they had their New Testament. And this became understood as their revelation. Although there's been back and forth about inclusion and exclusion of certain books within the Bible. One distinction I think is very stands out very much is the concern in all three of the Abrahamic traditions about what is called idolatry. That what we do is not idolatry, and what they do is idolatry. And when you really look into what is meant by idolatry, it kind of boils down to it's what they do. And it develops, it manifests in so many more specific ways. One should not worship God in some image. That's, of course, one of the 10 commandments in the, in Exodus and in one other book. So I think that becomes a really, really major issue in the Abrahamic traditions, is we are the ones who don't worship images. And we kind of see the opposite of that in what came to be called Hinduism, where you've got images all over the place.
Yes.
You've got thousands
Pictures,
statues, temples with deities, murtis, all over India. And it's almost the opposite in saying, what? Not worship God in an image? Why not? God is merciful. He will appear. He can appear in so many ways. Why not in this form? Mm-hmm. So that's there. It's often said that the Abrahamic traditions have a founder, whereas the Hindu traditions don't have a founder. Well, you could say that Hindu traditions, plural, have many founders, and then you could look at individual of those traditions and say, well, they're also founders. So in that sense, maybe there's not a whole lot of difference. It's, of course, very difficult to generalize also Abrahamic traditions. After all, look at the vast differences between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, how they see each other. Of course, there are among them some who appreciate similarities. There is, of course, in Islam, many of the prophets of Judaism and Christianity are acknowledged in their own way within Islam, and so on. Another kind of distinction that's sometimes made, but again, we kind of go back to Hinduism, whatever you say about it, the opposite's also true. So sometimes it's said the Abrahamic traditions are prophetic religions, where the key idea is that God calls upon someone to communicate his message to the people. And it's always a message of reform. It's a message which is, in some sense, radical, which is subversive, politically subversive, that can be there in prophetic religion. And then here comes the overgeneralization about the Hindu traditions or Indian or Vedic traditions, is they're more about meditation, and therefore they're more about sort of directing one's attention within oneself to find oneself, to question, and here I think is a prominent feature of this tradition, to question, who am I actually? I'm thinking I am so many different things, but who am I actually? What is my duty? That gets back to Dharma. What is my duty in this life? So that could be one way of making a distinction. Now, there's been an interesting phenomenon which one scholar calls the Semiticization of Hinduism. That since the 20th century, or starting in the late 19th, 20th century, with the British presence in India, with the Christian presence in India, there was a sense among people of India that, oh, gosh, there's this big challenge to our ways of life and our religion and our ways of seeing the world, and they're attacking us with their Christianity. We have to stand up to this, and we have to say what is our faith. And so when they came with their religion of the book, the Hindus said, well, we also have a book. Which book? Gosh, we've got so many books. Which one should we take? Bhagavad Gita. Yes, let's take Bhagavad Gita. And that became, especially in the late 19th century, and then from there, it became popularized as sort of, we also have a book. But it's gone beyond that. Semiticization brings in a lot of the whole notion that, like someone says, I am a Christian, so now people are saying, I am a Hindu, where earlier they wouldn't have really said that. They would have said, well, I worship Shiva, I worship Vishnu, I'm from this jati, which is another subject. It's come to be called caste. I'm part of this clan, and I live in this part of India, and this is how we live, and this is what we do. But they wouldn't have said, I'm a Hindu. That idea came from the West.
Yes, as you explained, yeah.
And it's had very unfortunate consequences in present-day India, with so much tension between the Hindus, so-called, on one side, Muslims, so-called, on another side, Christians, and there's been a lot of very dark history as a result.
Yes. But you were talking about idolatry, and we know, I mean, I've been to India also, and we see there's a deity behind your back. Why is Vedas give so much importance to the deity worship, the worship of the statues? What's the philosophy behind it?
Okay, I guess I asked for it because I mentioned it.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's what...
Because it's very prominent.
It is. And that's what I particularly studied. That's what I did my doctoral research on. I studied one particular temple in present-day Vrindavan, the Radharaman temple, and spent some months there, and it was quite fascinating. They have a particularly interesting image of Krishna, who is, they would say who, not which, but who is quite small. It's like this size. And he, Krishna, has been worshipped for the last 470 years, something like that. And the story is that this was what they call a self-manifest image or deity. And there's a whole story how he is said to have manifest to this particular sadhu or sage named Gopal Bhatta. So one basic idea of deity and deity worship is that here we are, we have bodies, physical bodies, and we have physical senses. We see through our eyes, and we have our five senses, and we want to experience spiritual reality. We want to experience the form of God, and this is a key idea which develops or which manifests especially in the Bhagavad Gita and especially in, I mentioned before, the Bhagavata Purana, that God has form. What sort of form? Well, Sat Chit Ananda Vigraha, a form which is constituted of eternity, knowledge, and ananda, sometimes translated as bliss, or joy, unending joy, ananda, without end, and free from darkness. God has a form, but we cannot experience that form because our senses are only attuned to or can relate to or connect with physical things. But God is all-powerful, and God is desiring. We have desire, God has desire, and His most fundamental desire is that we connect with Him, and that's where the word yoga has a very fundamental sense. The yoga means to connect. So, to connect ourselves with God, how to do it? Well, God is kind, so He appears in this world in many ways. And one of the ways He appears is in a physical form. Physical form which then can be engaged, can be seen, first of all. The word darshan is there. It's a very key word, the idea of seeing the divinity in His form and being seen. Diana Eck, a scholar also from Harvard, wrote a little book which became hugely popular and was used as a textbook, probably still is, in American universities introducing Hinduism. The book is simply called Darshan. There's a subtitle. And she's explaining in there, one of the key ideas of darshan is that you go in the temple and kind of present yourself before God. There He is. He's up there on the altar, and you're looking at Him, and He's looking at you. And so the darshan is going both ways. And so you're getting the sense that you are being reminded that actually God is everywhere and God is always looking at me. That's a kind of instrumental way of understanding the deity, but it is a key idea that is showing that there is a sense that the supreme truth, the supreme reality, which is what Veda is very concerned with, is ultimately, we can understand, is personal, is a person. And this brings in an interesting question of going back to the Abrahamic traditions. We always say they are monotheistic.
Yeah.
And people say, and Hinduism is polytheism.
We are pagans.
Right? Polytheism, paganism. And, well, maybe so if you take polytheism in a certain way, but if you want to go a little deeper, you may find that it's a kind of monotheism. But it's a multi-formed monotheism. God, being all-powerful, can appear in so many different forms with different purposes.
And different names, of course.
And different names, indeed. Yeah.
There is also a thing called, it's a household word, ahimsa. So when we speak about Vedas, we immediately think of this term, ahimsa, non-violence. You also wrote a book about it,
Yes.
which can be downloaded where?
It can be downloaded if you search the title of the book. You'll come right to the page of the publisher where the book can be downloaded without cost.
We will put description in the video.
We can put, if you can put the link.
Cow
also.
care in Hindu animal ethics. So I guess my question is, why it has been given so much importance as not just being non-violent to human beings, but to all entities and people being vegetarian. But we see, for example, in Abrahamic religions, they allow for killing animals for food, or mildly say they don't frown upon it.
Right.
So what do you think of it? Why this?
Okay, let's look at the word ahimsa first. Himsa is generally translated as violence, and again, I mentioned before, you put an short a before it, and that negates, so the opposite. So it's typically translated as non-violence, although it has a quite rich meaning beyond that. And it can be argued historically that the idea of ahimsa kind of emerges out of the fact that one of the practices of early Vedic tradition was ritual involving the ritual killing, the sacrificing of animals. And as that was going on, there was also a questioning of that whole process. And that questioning seems to have become louder and louder over time, and it can be argued that the whole Buddhist tradition was a protest against that, as also the Jain tradition, which makes the principle of ahimsa the core of their entire system, their entire philosophy. Ahimsa is, if we take it simply as nonviolence, is a recognition, let me put it this way, it's starting with a recognition or an acknowledgement that there is violence in this world, biotic violence. To live, we must eat. To eat, we must kill. And the question comes, what to kill? And so we find a statement in, it's in the Mahabharata, it's in the Bhagavata Purana. In Sanskrit, shall I quote a Sanskrit?
Why not? Definitely.
Ahastani sahastanam apadanis chatuspadam palguni tatra mahatam jivo jivasya jivanam. It's saying that, well, literally, those without hands are food for those with hands. In other words, plants are food for those with hands or those with apadani, chatuspadan. Those apadani without feet, plants, are food for those with 4 hands, with 4 feet, sorry. Palguni tatra mahatam. And the general principle is that the weak are food for the strong. And life is life for life. Jivo jivasya jivanam. So that's the reality we live in. It's a very, it's a kind of sad situation.
It's brutal.
It's brutal,
Yes.
yeah. What is it? Nature with red tooth and claw. And so we as human beings are reflective beings, and we are trying to see what is the proper way to live. Is there something called a proper way to live? And out of that we can say the principle of ahimsa comes out and expands. And in the Mahabharata, it's said that of all principles of dharma, which we said was ethics, the highest principle is ahimsa. The highest principle is ahimsa. And then we find in the classic yoga text, this is called the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali Yoga Sutra. It's a short text, and more yoga people are studying it. And we find there, Patanjali refers to the very first step in the very first step of yoga. The first of 8 steps is called yama, which means restraint, self-restraint. It's basically saying, hey, you want to do yoga, you're going to have to learn to control your behavior. How? Start with ahimsa. Start with what you eat. Start with, looking at your diet. But what is interesting is that the commentators, the traditional commentators, when they speak, when they write on ahimsa in yoga, they say this is foundational, and it, all the other principles are rooted in ahimsa. So if you get ahimsa right, you get all the others right, and vice versa. If you get there's 5 principles of restraint, there's 5 principles of observances. That can be a whole nother podcast. Then if you get those right, it's only so if you're getting, by that, you're getting ahimsa right. In other words, what's happening is one is learning to recognize that, hey, I'm a living being, and I want to keep my life, and here's another living being. It may be, I wrote specifically about cows in this book. It may be cows. They also want to preserve their life. Do you really need to eat them? What if you would instead, and it's been shown by several scholars that economically, ecologically, in terms of climate preservation and so on, it does not make sense that we are killing animals, especially at the rate we are, which is something between 60 and 80 billion land animals per year. So this is yoga. Yoga means start looking at yourself and what do I really need to maintain myself? And how can I minimize my karmic footprint on this planet? We're making such a mess of the planet because of overindulgence. It really boils down to that. That's what the Vedic tradition is saying.
Yeah, and then when you say, like, for example, to person, yeah, you think about, becoming vegetarian, and then the person say, yeah, but you also kill plants. You kill plants, it's the same. What do you say on that?
Is it really the same?
It's definitely not, but it's like,
Yeah. Can you look at an animal with the 2 eyes looking at you and then take a knife to that because you want to eat them? Is that the same as taking tomatoes, as taking, so many parts of plants, taking wheat plant, which is, the grains which are, they are falling to the ground. So there's a world of difference.
Yeah, I agree.
And the Vedic literature makes these distinctions and argues that this is something that humans can do, is we can make such distinctions, and we can make them for a reason. We can make them so that, making the better choice, we can benefit the world around us, benefit ourselves, and eventually free ourselves from the illusions and the miseries that we're suffering.
Yeah. Let's move into this term called Kali Yuga, because everyone speaks now about it. It's like this word has become a household word. Everyone knows about it. Vedas describe that we live in a Kali Yuga. What is this Kali Yuga, and what is the prophecy for our future?
Let me get out my crystal ball. Where did I put my crystal ball?
Yeah.
Okay, Kali.
Are we living our final hour, final times?
It's coming just around the corner.
Second coming of Christ, eternal destruction.
At the rate we're going, we may be at each other's throats sooner than we think, just to survive. This idea of yugas, as far as I know, appears not explicitly until the Mahabharata. And it's the idea is it's cyclical time. This is the more essential idea, is that time is cyclical, and we experience that daily, the sun rotating, and so on. But there are long cycles, short cycles, extremely long cycles, and there are 4 very long cycles. The last of the 4 being what's called Kali. And this word Kali is the same word as in Indian dice, when you play dice. Their dice are not like cubes, but they're long, and they have 4 sides. They have 2 ends and 4 sides. And the names of the 4 sides are Krita, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali. Krita means 4, and it also means, literally it means done, which means you won. You have won the throw. Treta means 3, Dvapara means 2, and Kali means 1, and Kali is the loser. The throw. And so
we're losers.
So we're losers. We're losers, yeah. And things are degrading instead of evolution. You could say there's more devolution. And there's a nice book on that subject from a friend of mine.
We have it there. Yeah. Michael Kramer.
Yes.
Yeah, human
devolution.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Read it.
And there's different theories about the lengths of these yugas. The one which I'm familiar with is that these are very long periods, and that this final period we're in, we're only at the beginning of it. So it's going to get a lot worse before it'll get better. It's saying that we have more than 400,000 years to go. So don't hold your breath for the end of it. But it is a fairly gradual process. But others will say, no, it's not 400,000 years, it's maybe 1,200 years. Others will say, well, it's much more relative term. It's not exactly a set number of years. It can be understood in more relational terms in different contexts. But there is certainly this sense which especially starts in the Mahabharata, that things are winding down. It's said in the Bhagavata Purana that in this age, how does it go? Manda Sumanda Matayo, that what characterizes this age is that we, human beings, are manda, which means slow or dull. Sumanda mati, which means the mati, the mind, is really dull. And manda bhagya, we're unfortunate. And upadruta, and one translation is we tend to fight. We tend to be quarrelsome.
Yes.
Have you noticed?
Yeah.
So this is kind of the situation we're in.
But also some say that there is kind of golden age in this Kali Yuga. Do you know anything about this? That's during the Kali Yuga that we are now living or approaching like a little mini golden age.
Yes, that idea comes in particular in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. The Vaishnavas I mentioned before, they are worshipping Vishnu, and more specifically they worship Krishna. And more specifically, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas worship Sri Chaitanya as Krishna, and he advented in the late 15th century. And it's understood that since he appeared personally and taught a method for sort of protecting oneself from this, the effects of this age, and taught a practice of dharma, which is practical, which can be practiced in this age. It's therefore we have a golden age that we're in. That's the understanding.
So we are living in a golden age of Kali Yuga at the moment.
Yes, congratulations.
Amazing. So let's now move a little bit more into the philosophy of Puranas. Namely Srimad Bhagavatam. I love it, I read it. There's a whole set there. I have it on English, have it on Serbian, Croatian, few like first and second canto. So they are full of descriptions about the purpose of our life, about who we truly are. So can you explain, according to Puranas, Vedas, who are we? What is the purpose of our life? I mean, why do we live? Why do we die?
Yeah, I think we all have that question, especially when we're when we're children, isn't it? We all at some point stopped and asked ourselves,
what's the point?
What's the point? I remember distinctly asking myself, how is it that this is my mother and this is my father? Why wasn't I born in that family over there, or that family, but I'm in this family? How did that happen? So the questioning, you could say this is the beginning point, especially as you mentioned in the Bhagavata Purana, is a recognition that we have as human beings this special capacity to question. And the whole Bhagavata Purana is built on questions. It's the first and sort of founding question of the king who is questioning the sage. Shuka is the sage's name. The king has been condemned to die. He's been cursed. He's going to die in 7 days, and he knows it. And he realizes there's no point in fighting against it. Now this is just as a footnote, the Mahabharata tells a very different story. It says the king tried to fight against it. He tried to avoid it. They don't tell you that in the abridged editions of the Mahabharata, but he tries to avoid it. The Bhagavatam says, no, he wasn't so foolish as to try to avoid it. He recognized, this is my time. I have 7 days and 7 nights to live. What do I do with this short time that I have. He does the right thing. He approaches a sage. Shuka is his name, who is well-versed and, we say, realized in the knowledge of the Veda, and specifically this book, the Bhagavata Purana, about which we made a film. That's something else you can maybe give a link to.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing. I watched it like last night, and when did you publish that documentary?
We published it, well, it's been
When
over a
was
year
it
ago.
released? Over a year. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I will put definitely a link in the video.
Good. So, and his question is, what is the duty of a person who's about to die? So there's this idea again of what should I do? Which means there's a sense of should. There's a sense of ought, not only of I want, but what should I do? And so this leads into this discourse which expands out and unfolds through many, many narratives to understand, first of all, who am I, and who or what is ultimate truth and what is ultimate purpose. So it's a long story that kind of brings you to the point gradually of understanding, okay, this is important. And the very first verse of the Bhagavata kind of takes the whole 12 skandhas, they're called, or cantos, and shrinks it all together in one verse. And this one verse, I'll just recite the last line, Dhammna svena sada nirasta kuhakam satyam param dhimahi. And this satyam param, satyam means truth, param means supreme or ultimate. So it's a kind of invitation. Now let's meditate. Dhimahi means let us meditate. On what? Let's meditate on the ultimate truth. We've been meditating on everything. We've been meditating on how to enjoy life for many lifetimes. This is the idea. We've tried, and we've tried again, repeatedly.
Chewing the chewed.
That expression is there, yeah. Puna punas charvita charvananam is the Sanskrit. That again and again I'm chewing what has already been chewed.
And spit it.
And yeah. So here it's saying, Satyam Param Dhimahi, let's meditate on the supreme truth. Okay, well, what is that? All right, then that's what the Bhagavata Purana is introducing. And it comes to the grand finale, in a sense, is in the 10th. It has 12 parts, skandhas, but the 10th is by far the longest and is most central. And there it celebrates the appearance of the supreme truth as Krishna. Krishna is that supreme truth, also referred to as Bhagavan. So, what are we doing here? Well, who are we? What are we doing? The Bhagavatam in particular, and most explicitly, it's sort of hinted at, and it's hard to find in other texts, but in the Bhagavatam it kind of says, okay, now we're just going to spell it out for you, that the purpose of life is to develop our relationship, which is a loving relationship with the Supreme Being, the Supreme Truth, who is a person as we are persons, with whom there is reciprocation, with whom a relationship can unfold, which never ends, which simply gets better and better the more we engage in that relationship. So the Bhagavatam is giving that message, and it's giving it in a quite amazing way.
Yeah. We have in our web shop also, we are offering Srimad Bhagavatam on creation, the first and the second canto.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, people.
Now there's, maybe I
about
can put in another little plug, another book which I've done, co-authored with a very good friend of mine, a professor in America, Ravi Gupta, is a one-volume selections from the Bhagavata Purana, translations, with summaries of all the parts that we don't translate, so you can get the whole picture.
Amazing.
And that's called The Bhagavata Purana, Selected Readings. And it was published by Columbia University Press.
Amazing. So when we speak about the purpose of our life, we always connect this term karma and samsara. How do I spell it?
Samsara.
Samsara, karma and samsara.
Yeah.
They are laws of universe. What are they actually? Can you give us a little explanation of what is karma and how it affects us?
Karma and samsara. Maybe we start with samsara.
Yes.
Samsara is a nice word because it's onomatopoeic. It has a sound which suggests what it's referring to. And what it's referring to is the flow. Sara can have the sense of flowing. The flowing of life in a cycle, in a cycle, which continues after this life. So we sometimes speak of the repetition of birth, old age, disease, and death, as is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. Another way of putting that is repeated death and rebirth. So the death that we're all facing ahead of us from this life, we are told, reassured, if you like, don't worry, you'll be reborn again. And for some, that's a great relief to hear. I'll be reborn again. Yes, you'll be reborn again, but where are you going to be reborn? And are you going to be? Maybe you'll be reborn as a human being, but maybe you'll be born in a country which is, extremely poor, where there's war going on or whatever. Or maybe you won't be reborn as a human being. So, okay, you're saying maybe. How do I know? Well, it has to do with karma. And what is karma? Literally, karma just means action. And it's everything that we're doing as we speak and as we think. And when we do something, that's all karma. And wherever there is action, as the physicists tell us in conventional Newtonian physics, wherever there's an action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So there's some sort of effect, an effect which will come back to us. What goes around comes around, as they say. As ye sow, so shall ye reap, is there in the Bible. So they don't use the word karma, but they seem to have the idea of karma also in the Bible. Oh, okay, so then it's how I act that's going to determine also what I am in my next life? Yes. Oh, so how would I change it so that I can have a good life? Well, you can do nice things for people. You can give a lot in charity. You can be pious. You can avoid self-destructive activities. There are a lot of things you can do. There's so many descriptions within Vedic literature of what you can do. But there's a catch. What? There's a catch. Yes, there's a catch. The catch is you may do some very nice things in this life and get a very nice body in your next life, be born in a very nice, wealthy family. And then what happens? Maybe in that wealthy family, happy family, some tragedy happens. Maybe it's one of your own children suddenly dies and you're heartbroken. And you say, why? Why did this have to happen? Well, maybe it had to happen because of that person's previous karma, but also your own previous karma. Maybe you don't remember, but something you've done. So this is one of the objections to the idea of karma. But I don't remember what I did in my previous life. How does this help me in this life to be taught a lesson from something I did wrong in my previous life? Well, there are a lot of things we forget within this life.
Definitely.
Do we remember just what we were doing at this time a week ago?
No.
So we're essentially forgetful beings, but there's someone who always remembers, and that is referred to in the Bhagavad Gita as Param Atma. Atma means self, that's us. And Param Atma, that's the, we may want to say super self, who's always with us. And that goes quite far back in the Veda. It goes all the way back to the Rig Veda, and then again in the Upanishads, this beautiful analogy of two birds in a tree. One bird is busy, busy, busy eating the fruit in the tree, and the other bird is simply watching the first bird eat. And so the one bird, that's us, and the other bird, that's the Param Atma. And so that Param Atma is always watching. And as long as we ignore Paramatma, we'll be very much implicated by our actions, karma. So the conclusion might be, someone would reasonably conclude, okay, so that means the way to get out of this mess is stop acting. I will stop. I won't do anything. I'm just going to sit, I'm going to meditate. And that's what's being explained, especially in, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, but especially in the beginning, few chapters. It's not possible.
It's not going to work.
You can't stop acting. Your so-called not acting is another form of acting. Okay, well, if that's the case, what am I supposed to do? If acting is getting me in trouble and not acting is also getting me in trouble, what am I supposed to do? That's what the Bhagavad Gita is about. It's about rising above both action and inaction by completely revising our sense of motivation based on an understanding of who we actually are and what it is that makes one actually peaceful, satisfied, happy, which is a happiness which, real happiness has to come from within. Many people know that.
Yes.
But to kind of really know it, that's what we want to pursue according to these texts.
So in this way, we stop this wheel of samsara.
Exactly. It's described as a wheel.
And where do we go from there?
Where do we go from there? Yes, that's the interesting. Then it gets interesting. And this is where we might want to say there's an interesting departure between Buddhist traditions, for the most part, and so-called Hindu traditions, and particularly the Vaishnava traditions, where the Buddhist traditions generally will speak of this liberation from the cycle. They refer to it as nirvana, and nirvana literally means extinguishment. Like you blow out a candle, you extinguish the candle. The Vaishnavas will say, no, we don't want that, thank you very much. We don't want to extinguish ourselves, and even if we wanted to, you couldn't do it. So what to do? Well, how about going to a realm which is completely beyond the realm of karma? Could it be that there is such a realm? This goes back to Rig Veda, that there is a portion of reality, it kind of, to get the sense of things, it uses a bit of mathematics. It says there's this 1/4 realm, and there's the 3/4 realm. And the 1/4 realm, that's where we are now. And the 3/4 realm, that's where we want to go. In other words, it's a realm which is much more expansive. And the word Brahman, which is sometimes in the Vedanta tradition, in the Upanishads, is the sort of one word emblem of this ultimate reality. Brahman literally means that which is expanding. It's expanding. So this tradition would say it's not about snuffing out life, it's where life really starts. It's where we can wake up to our real identity in relation to the higher self, and engaging in that relationship from then on.
That leads me naturally to my next question, and that is, what is the absolute truth?
Ta-da! The final question.
One truth for all.
Yes.
How do Vedas describe the absolute truth?
The absolute truth. I mentioned Satyam Param Dhimahi. Well, it's not something that you articulate in one interview necessarily.
Yeah, well, let's do it shortly if we can.
Yeah, we understand. Let's take the Bhagavata Purana. There, the absolute truth is described as having 3 aspects, or 3 ways of seeing it. I just mentioned Brahman. And Brahman is sometimes, as a kind of metaphor perhaps, but it's compared to a sort of unlimited light. So people say, I see the light. Yes, that might be a kind of realization of this Brahman as an aspect, as a basic dimension of this absolute reality, which is eternal. But it goes beyond that, and we've mentioned already Param Atman, Paramatma. This is the higher self, and the higher self is, okay, we take the light, which is, we see the light, and as a very rough analogy, we look into a lake surface, and the waves are waving, and we see the sparkle of the sun on those waves. Each wave, there's a sparkling sun, and each of those sparkling reflections from the sun might be compared to Param Atma. That's the higher self present in you, in me, in everyone who is watching us now, and in the cows, and in all living beings, all creatures. So that would be a second level, and a more kind of specified level, and it's a level of reality which now comes more into relating how we act in this world. How do we make decisions? Well, we don't notice, but Paramatma is there helping us, nudging us this way, that way, giving us intelligence, giving us memory.
Like
how to
intuition,
act.
some kind of...
Can be
yeah?
intuition, yeah. Yeah, what we call intuition may actually be Paramatma.
Maybe or may not be.
Yes, can also, we may think. And then the third category of understanding of the same Satyam Param, same truth, is Bhagavan. And the word Bhagavan is Sanskrit, little Sanskrit lesson. Okay, Bhaga means share. Like if you're a business person and you are a shareholder in a company, I have 50% shares in this company. That means you have 50% Bhaga. And Bhagavan, Van means possessor, one who possesses shares. If a person possesses all the shares in a company, you could call him the Bhagavan of that company. So the term Bhagavan in relation to absolute truth means that person to whom all shares, that is, all wealth, all what we could call opulence, is possessed by that person. And it points to a person. Nowadays, people like to talk a lot about energy.
Yes.
Universal energy.
That's true.
I want to, become one with the energies of the world, or I want to relate with the universe and the energy of the universe. Yes, there are energies, but if we think a little about how energies work, we can trace them back to someone behind the energy. There's always a person behind energy. We don't usually think of it that way, but there is. And we ourselves are examples of that. We have energy, we exercise energy, we have, in Sanskrit, Shakti, we have powers of speech, for example. Anyway, so Bhagavan is that person. And then the Bhagavata Purana is unfolding. Okay, Bhagavan, so how do we understand this person Bhagavan? The main emphasis is on this supreme person who is our, described in the Bhagavad Gita as our best well-wisher.
So how can one, you said everyone's talking about energy, but how can you have a relationship with energy?
Exactly.
I mean, it's kind of too abstract.
Exactly.
Even boring. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not attractive to me at all. I prefer, seeing God as a person. Also, he has, of course, energies, but you can have a relationship with a
Yeah.
person.
Exactly.
Yeah. You are also sannyasi, a swami. What does that mean? Which vows and practices are you practicing? How does your day look like?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There is a tradition which is centuries old in India, possibly longer, of recognizing that we go through different life stages. And there's a general division of 4 stages. You can be a student, as a child, and then becoming a formal student. This is all one stage. And then eventually most people will marry and take the responsibilities of the family. And after some years, children become grown up. The husband and the wife the tradition is that they may then go wandering together or separately for the purpose of pursuing their practices of meditation, of yoga. And then there's a 4th stage, and that is the sannyas ashram, ashrams. They're all ashramas, or places of refuge, of shelter. And this fourth one, sannyas, is, again, traditionally, there's two traditions. One is you can, and generally it would be males would take sannyas when they're younger, and the other tradition is having gone through all the other three stages, then you take sannyas. The vow of sannyas, you could say it's something like in the West, in the monastic tradition, it's taking final orders. In the Catholic monastic traditions, I think they would speak of taking final orders, which means you're making a final lifetime commitment, which it's expected you will not give up for the rest of this life. So the basic vow of sannyas is to renounce the life of the household, of having a family, of living with wife and children, and so on. And again, traditionally it means one is a wandering monk. So I took the formal order of sannyas. Let's see, now it's 2022 as we speak. It was 2014. So it's been 8 years.
Mm.
Yeah, just 8 years. 8 years ago I took these orders. There can be, again, traditionally, lots and lots of quite extreme austerities for the sannyasi, because it's understood now is the time when you've really got to prepare for your last days. And you want to do it. The idea is you don't want to end this life in some sort of distracted and maybe unconscious state or whatever. You want to be as awake as possible because you want to make that leap, really, from this 1/4 reality I mentioned to the 3/4 reality. And to do that, you want to be very conscious. And to do that, you want to become aloof from what are always called dualities of this existence. As long as we have these bodies, we experience dualities. We experience heat and cold. We experience happiness and distress. We experience possibly reputation or loss of reputation. These are especially these three are mentioned as the sort of things we're concerned about. And yoga is about finding a way to stand above these dualities and just, not that one becomes unaware of them, but rather one becomes aware, okay, it's like this now, but this is not me. So sannyas is really about working in a more conscious way on that. But also in this modern time, here I am, not dressed as a traditional sannyasi at the moment, and I'm traveling and I'm giving lectures in universities and I'm writing a book and so on. What is that to do with sannyas? Well, it's about also sharing this knowledge, sharing this wisdom with others, because as we said earlier, this is the age of Kali. And if we can, do something to help people wake up and get an opportunity to free themselves. And even in this life, just forget about liberation and 3/4 Vaikuntha, just living a more decent life in this life by understanding how to better live in relation to others. That's what sannyas is about, helping others. So the sannyas can have quite a variety of duties, including being something like one who does pastoral care.
Like a spiritual master.
Yeah, it can be a spiritual guide.
Disciples giving initiations.
That's there also.
Yeah. And also like your academic achievements, studying, traveling, giving. You're very much, busy, traveling all around the globe.
And sometimes I think maybe it's time to stay in one place.
No, please don't stay. Not yet. So what would you advise to people to our viewers who are interested in this Vedic practices, and especially in Bhakti Yoga, how to start? Which kind of books to read, what practices, which habits to incorporate, or which practices to avoid in order to to make better, spiritual advancement.
Yeah. Well, okay, start with reading. We've mentioned it several times, Bhagavad Gita.
Start with reading.
Start with reading. Bhagavad Gita is a good start, although it's can also be a bit formidable, the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, because you suddenly encounter all these very strange names that you're not familiar with, because it's a carryover from what's happening in the Mahabharata. But okay, you can practically skip to chapter 2 and go from there and get the basic teachings that Krishna is giving to understand. We're intelligent beings. We want to know why we're doing something, and Bhagavad Gita is helping in that purpose. Why take up, spiritual practice, and what is the aim, and as you said, what to avoid, and so on. So Bhagavad Gita is good for that. It's also good to make an effort to find others who are pursuing the same. And I have to say, you mentioned the word spiritual master. Sooner or later, actually the fact is, you cannot get very far at all without someone who's accomplished in the practice. There are people who say, well, I'm my own guru. Yes, you're your own guru, but if you're your own guru, you really have a fool for a disciple. So it's not gonna it's not gonna get you very far. Of course, there can be exceptions, but don't think you're the exception. Don't think I will get an honorary doctorate just by, expecting one to come to me. That's the idea. We need to work for it. So that's something to look towards. Okay, maybe I'm, not so clever myself. Even I do the reading, maybe I'm going to need some guidance. Yes, and Krishna explains, the whole Gita is Krishna acting as guru for Arjuna, who's acting as his student. So taking on, it's said the best way to read the Bhagavad Gita is in the mood of Arjuna, if one can try to imbibe that mood. And then what else can I do? Well, I mentioned before, we can ask ourselves, do I really need to eat these things which are costing the lives of other highly conscious beings? Maybe not. And then get yourself a good vegetarian cookbook, learn how to cook, or vegan, and that's a whole nother topic, vegetarian or vegan. Start out vegetarian at least, and maybe you can go eventually to being vegan. There's a third option, what I call a himsa vegan, taking dairy products in particular from cows that are protected their entire life. And there's not many of them.
Yeah.
So it probably means for most people being practically vegan. It's a nice position to take. So changing habits like this. And then also there are meditations that one can practice. But again, this is essentially done under guidance with a teacher, with a master. In particular, because nowadays yoga, nowadays meaning this age of Kali, extremely difficult to do much of what traditional yogis would do. But in particular in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks about bhakti yoga. And with bhakti, which means devotion or devotional service, one can really kind of from day one take up practices which can be yoga, which are connecting oneself in a spiritual way. And one of these practices is using the tongue for eating, but also for speaking, and also for what some call chanting, which is some repetition of spiritual sound vibration mantras. And there are any number of mantras that are recommended. And we mentioned Chaitanya previously, Sri Chaitanya,
Yes.
Golden Age.
Mm-hmm.
So he, in particular, recommended to chant what's also become kind of a household expression, the Hare Krishna mantra.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's very nice to chant and to sing. And that's something your YouTube followers will like. I think they'll see if they haven't already. There are kirtans, any number of kirtans to be seen and heard online. And one can listen to, and one can also participate in these very joyful kind of singing. Hare Krishna mantra especially it can be fun, spiritual fun.
Maybe for the end you can chant just one Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, not sing, just say it in perfect Sanskrit.
All right.
to leave us with it, like our final message to our viewers.
Okay. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Like
Dr. Valpey, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you here. It was a real pleasure.
My pleasure as well.
Thank you.
All the best.